Hey everyone, Harry here, and I just wanted to let you know how you could experience the excitement and adrenaline of MotoGP like a VIP. With MotoGP Premier, the official ticket package provider to MotoGP, you can dive headfirst into unparalleled access at every race on the calendar, whether you're watching the action from a grandstand or immersing yourself in Apex's Premier Lounge. All packages include exclusive behind-the-scenes experiences, from exploring the paddock and inside team garages to walking the starting grid, even rubbing elbows with riders. Every moment is designed to elevate your Grand Prix experience to extraordinary heights. If you think that sounds great, then why not take 10% off selected 2024 ticket packages at the Dutch, German, British, Austrian and Aragon Grand Prix. Just use code OMG10 at motogppremier.motogp.com/OMG at checkout. Not applicable to MotoGP VIP Village or ticket and hotel packages. Ends 15th of July 2024. Take your GP experience to the next level. Only with MotoGP Premier.
Hello, you're listening to the OMG MotoGP podcast with former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Ewan and myself, Amy Reynolds. And this week we're joined by Jack Gorse, who's Dorna's social media editor. And Jack, I also believe there's some family connections with the industry as well.
Yeah, there is. Thank you for having me on, people, first of all. My dad worked in motorcycle racing and still does for years and years, been around since the dinosaurs were around, the same as Keith, I'm sure. But he actually worked with Keith for a year or two, or I believe it was one season he was your crew chief, but I think he was in the same team for a number of years as well, right?
He was. It was a Yamaha team ran by Steve Parrish. What a bloody bunch when you think of it, that your dad worked for. I remember your dad particularly was very, very pedantic, very particular. He was quite sharp at what he wanted and how he went on. I seem to be meeting kids of people that work with me nowadays, more and more online, use social media people.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a weird one, isn't it? We kind of caught up. The second generation has come along, so it probably does make you feel a little bit old. So sorry about that one, Keith. But yeah, he's still kicking around anyway. He's still working away in BMW and World Superbike now as well. So
that's really cool. Jack, before we kind of touch on this week, I was actually interested to ask you a little bit about, what's happening on social media at the moment with MotoGP. Like, who is the most popular rider?
Most popular rider, well, obviously Marc Marquez has kind of had a bit of a rebound still, after the Honda years, particularly the last 2 years at Honda. To be fair, a lot of the content around Marc did start to drop off. There were still big numbers, of course, but it didn't have that, maybe superstar factor, you'd say, that it had in the years gone by. Still obviously was the biggest rider, but again, now, you see how happy he is. You see him yesterday dancing around with his fan club in the grandstand and stuff. And, of course it's going to get big clicks, and it gets even bigger clicks because it's Marc Marquez. But to be honest, Fabio is probably the second biggest rider, but Pedro Acosta is obviously, he's making inroads into those two as well. It was quite interesting actually in Le Mans, because when the circuit announcer that's kind of hyping everyone up before the race was running through the rider names and announcing them for the crowd to give a big cheer, Pedro he got the third biggest cheer behind the two French guys, Fabio and Joan. So it was quite interesting.
You must be looking forward to the changes that are imminent. Presumably Liberty, when that deal goes through with Dorna and all the rest of it. At the moment, Liberty, I don't suppose, have much input because it's not been formally agreed and formally signed off. But with what they've done with Formula One, you would think that in MotoGP, there's going to be quite a lot of changes regarding social media and the more modern, should we say, channels of communication.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks around what's going to change, how much is going to change. I mean, as we ourselves workers at Dorna, we don't have much of an idea at the moment at all. Obviously, the whole deal is still waiting to be officially done for all the channels, and hopefully will be by the end of the year. But yeah, what will change in terms of social media? I mean, hopefully we maybe have some less restrictions and stuff we can do. Obviously, one way that we work really strongly in Dorna is with the broadcasters, to be able to give them as much as possible so they can make the difference in their own countries, and so we can do it as well in all our territories. But it'd be interesting to see if anything like that changes, and whether we change the way we do things or not. But I guess we'll wait and see.
I don't know whether you can answer this or even if you should answer it. So shut me up if you want to. Your dad used to. The point being is geo-blocking is something that always annoys people around the world when somebody's trying to, look at something. For instance, here in the UK, we might advertise something on Twitter or on X and say, well, look at this. And other people can't see it because it's blocked in another country. I mean, maybe you can explain to me how that works because it's so damned annoying.
Yeah, obviously that is all to do with the rights agreements we have with the different broadcasters. They obviously get to post, the big clips from MotoGP weekends that they can in their territory. They're allowed to post whatever they want, whenever they want. And then it comes down to that they can only post it in their territory, in their country. In terms of, how annoying that is for someone that's watching in a general thing, if you just go on Twitter and you want to see a clip, of course, it depends on how active your broadcaster is, in your country, so TNT Sports, for example, are quite active on social media and they post a lot, but maybe a different broadcaster isn't so active. So for someone in a different country, then maybe it is a little annoying. And I guess then that comes to the thing where we fill in the gaps where our content is available everywhere throughout the world and hopefully can, kind of fill the need that they want in terms of how fast everything's posted as well.
That's MotoGP.com, presumably.
Yeah, and all our social channels, yeah.
I think more and more as well we see in the sports industry is where the lines are starting to blur slightly between, these athletes and they're also then moving on to become content creators. One person that pops up in my mind is Aleix Espargaro, who obviously the big news started off this weekend with him announcing his retirement. Keith, you and I touched on potentially that being what was going to be announced on the Thursday press conference, and it turned out to be correct. But Jack, from your standpoint, how successful do you think that would be? Do you think you'll see more riders, going down that route?
Sorry, can you just repeat that one? I think the internet dropped
just
out
in
on my
terms
end.
of them becoming more content creators as such. They're not just athletes. They're now kind of fulfilling this other role as creating content.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, I don't know how much you keep up with. I know, obviously, Amy, you have a background in motocross and how much you keep up with the American side with motocross and supercross over there. Obviously, Aleix does now do a lot of vlogs on YouTube and some other riders do some small things, but no one particularly does like this kind of weekly or every 2 weeks vlog type thing. But if you look over in the States, like with the motocross races and supercross races, a lot of them do it just, one, because they enjoy it, two, it's good interaction for the fans, and their kind of media rules over there are maybe perhaps more free than what we have in MotoGP, so they can show a little bit more that you wouldn't see usually. And I think it's definitely, we hope to see more riders go down that route. We do push them actively to share more and do that if they want to, because ultimately it comes down to whether they want to, and also their agencies that they work with and all this. But hopefully we see it, and if Aleix does do a vlog of his weekend covering his retirement and then the sprint win and the emotion on Sunday, it would be a nice piece of content for fans to look at for sure.
How integrated is your team regards to the broadcast side and the social media side and obviously the PR side? I mean, we've seen over the years, race teams, for instance, have become much more integrated. They collaborate much more, and the content, the output is miles better for everyone looking in. Is it fairly well tight in your little group in Dorna?
In terms of my little group, on my level, obviously there's lots of things that I'm not involved in that go higher up with my boss and her boss and all sorts, which then they're very integrated with talking to broadcasters every day, talking to the team's personnel every day, talking to their agency's personnel every day. Like, it's a constant stream of working together to, whether it's about content or something in the future. Particularly as well with the broadcasters, because then it's, we don't want to step on their toes because they're allowed to post certain things like highlights perhaps before we are. So then you have to work together with them to be able to do that. And that's done on a daily basis, particularly by my boss.
I got an almighty rocket one day. I was sat in the office with Mike Trimby and Hervé Poncharal, obviously president of IRTA, and the International Race Teams Association. And over their own private radios came this piece of information. So I immediately ran back to the commentary booth for live television for what was BT Sport, now TNT. And while I was running there, my phone buzzed, and there was the Dorna announcement of what had just been said in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I blurted it out. Trimby's got it on his TV in the office. My phone goes the next minute with him shouting every F and C down the phone. You can't repeat what you've heard in our office and all the rest of it. But he hadn't seen the email that Dorna had sent out. So I can see sometimes where there's a bit of conflict of information and where it comes from. It's amazing how a paddock as open as the one he is, with the information that's flowing around within it, more stuff doesn't get out inappropriately. It amazes me how you guys manage to keep it as tight as you do.
I think that's, obviously there's sometimes where you work in a company and you think, oh, why aren't they maybe telling us things? But it's needed to be that way just to keep, those leaks from getting out with some things that perhaps happen. Well, obviously on the PR side, they do an incredible job with, it's when there is a big announcement or something's going on that a lot of people, as soon as it is announced, they're gonna have eyes on it. It is kind of a need to know basis, and then it's planned with, if there's a social plan that's needed off the back of that, then our boss will tell whoever's needed in the social media team to cover it and all that sort of stuff.
All I can say, if I may, is you're the luckiest sod there is when it comes to social media, because you couldn't get a better sport at the moment with some better players in it. I think that we are at the absolute, as you can see, and as we have discussed, I am quite an old fella, and I've been around a long time, and I've seen quite a lot of changes. But I don't believe in the good old days. I just think that where we are now is the best. We have never been better than we are across the board. So therefore, I think you're a lucky sod.
That's why it's obscene, really, that we don't have a younger audience, because the clips that must go out of the action of the weekend, like he said, you couldn't, you've got so much to play with. There are so many moments in one race, and not just in MotoGP, in Moto3, Moto2. It's almost like vile content galore, like the kind of things that even if you are just flicking through as like a 10-year-old, as a 20-year-old, as a 30, 40, blah, 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 it's going to make you stop and look at it, because it's all jaw-dropping stuff. So we'll see what happens over the next few years. But bringing it on to the race we've just seen this weekend, Keith, I wanted to ask you a question before we move on about the Aleix Espargaro retirement. How many riders do you know in their careers that have bowed out, arguably at the peak of them? I mean, he will finish this year, his final year in MotoGP, as a MotoGP race winner.
Yeah, you can't get better than that, can you? And kind of at that point, sometimes you think to yourself, well, have I done the right thing? Because you want to hang on in there a little bit longer. But most riders are, at this level, are eased out before they embarrass themselves, should we say. I mean, and I think Aleix Espargaro, he's on the right bike, he's riding, the sprint races are made for the like of Aleix as well, because he's and that bike came to him. There are certain circumstances at the weekend that were a little bit special, weren't there? Low grip. We talk about low grip at Catalonia. It's amazing, really, when you think how much money they've spent on that place. And yet the track is really quite tricky. It's an absolute crash fest throughout all four classes at the weekend. So I think that I'm really pleased for him. I wouldn't have put money on him winning, but then again, I wouldn't have put money on 3 race leaders falling off in the sprint to start with. It was one of those unusual weekends. I'm really pleased for him. It could not be better. It was a very emotional weekend for Aleix Espargaro, and as we all know, he wears his heart on his sleeve anyway, so there were tears galore, from Jorge Martin as much as it was out of Aleix at the press conference. It was remarkable, really. All these grown rock hard, tough motorbike racers bawling their eyes out all over the place. It's something wouldn't have happened in my day, I can tell you. I am joking. But it wouldn't. But the point being is that it was a fantastic result for Aleix, but his time is right. He's not going to win a world title, and there isn't room for all the talent that's coming up. I mean, we're going to discuss it in a little while, I'm sure, but we've talked about Acosta already. Fermin Aldegar's coming through next year. Ducati have got this awful he says with a smile on his face. For those that are not watching on YouTube, he's got this awful position where, they don't know who the hell they're going to put in alongside Pecco Bagnaia next year for the factory ride. They've got 2 or 3 riders, and that juggling that they've got to do, again, from a social media point of view, is great fun. It keeps everybody speculating, everybody's running around in circles trying to make their bets. It's one of the things I love about social media, because you can get something wrong, and by the time it's gone round like a toilet roll, you could make another prediction in a half an hour's time, and that could be the one that's actually right. So from an input point of view, from a social media point of view, it's quite good fun to do all of that speculation. Perhaps we'll do some in a minute.
Why not?
Good, Amy.
After you, Jack.
I do think, as you say, we have the perfect storm this year with all the silly season stuff, because it's pretty much the biggest silly season ever, isn't it? There was only 3 riders coming into the year that had a contract for next year, and then with the racing, with Acosta coming in, asking question marks at KTM, about their future and all this sort of stuff, it's it definitely has turned into the perfect storm, and I hope ultimately that it just leads to more fans coming into the sport. And I definitely think so far it has been this year. We've seen an increase in our numbers across all our social channels, so it's been good so far.
I think it's a good thing that it's later this year. I mean, I think that this, the fact that everyone's talking about it going to be signed up by Mugello, for me, I would put some kind of football gate on it. Not that I know anything about football, but they have a certain time that you've got to be signed up by, and there is this window, of a transfer window or whatever it is. And I kind of quite like the idea of that, because I don't like everything being set in stone right now, because a team can make a massive mistake. You can sign somebody that you really think is going to be red hot and he's not. Bastianini, look, he took the position. Bastianini, great rider, still 4th in the championship at the moment, so we can't knock him off. But the fact is Jorge Martin, the man that he was in competition for that berth, is tearing all the weeds up. I just think a later signing period would be better for the sport, better for the fans, and probably a little fairer.
Summer is fast approaching, and so are some of the most iconic GPs on the calendar. Imagine feeling the roar of the Premier class at the Dutch, German, British, Austrian or Aragon Grand Prix, with exclusive rider meet and greets, team garage experiences, weekend paddock access, plus so much more. And if you fancy 10% off those mentioned Grand Prix, then head over to MotoGPPremier.motogp.com/OMG and enter the code OMG10 at checkout.
Well, the biggest one is the Marc Marquez 4-year contract. Look what that amounted to. But Keith, from a rider's perspective, if you are waiting most of the season to find out what your future is, surely that doesn't actually do them any favours, because quite often we'll reference the fact that, he was distracted because he was wondering what was going on with his contract next year. And then as soon as that contract is signed, you kind of tend to see them kick on a bit. From a rider's perspective, do you think that would actually be to their detriment?
Yeah, different people react in different ways. This is the big boys club. We're not talking about club racing. This is the big boys club. These guys get paid huge amounts of money. They are at the top of their game. They have management, they have dietitians, they have everything there to put this together. So, if it gets a bit tough sometimes, the way I see that is tough. It is how it is. At the end of the day, teams want what they want from their riders. Riders want what they want from teams. And we've seen you mentioned Marc Marquez, you can break a contract if you're prepared to break a contract. Contracts they basically set out the terms of your deal. But if you're not happy and they're not happy, unhappiness produces slow riders and poor development. And so therefore, it's not in anybody's interest to continue that. Marquez is remarkable. I mean, I say this just about every week. I mean, I just think the way he goes about the way he rode a motorbike, now the way he goes about his business, and now is jumping up and down and dancing on the barriers, and an appalling dance up on the podium last time. It's just, I think it's wonderful. I just think Marc Marquez is still the superstar there to be beaten, and the fact that he dumped all that money, millions and millions of pounds, to ride for an independent team on a 1-year-old bike, just so he could turn his career around at a time in his life where, if he was going to do it, he had to do it then. One more year would have been 1 year too late. Is just the best story. And if we had a situation where maybe Liberty had been on board a year earlier or 2 years earlier, the amount they would be making out of this at the moment, it would be, it's such a special story that I think that we're kind of overlooking it almost. We kind of expect that performance from Marc Marquez, but to anybody outside of the sport looking in with an opportunity to see the actual detail around what he's done and what he's doing and coming from where he's come from, both physically and mentally, is spectacular. I can't find another example of it at the moment in my mind. Certainly not in our sport, that is for sure.
Jack, it's kind of like you said, it almost feels as though he's won everybody over again. He's gone from being that GOAT who, let's be honest, everyone was getting a little bit fed up of seeing win week in, week out. And when something dramatic happens to him, it's all a bit like, oh God, but it's done a full circle, and now everybody wants to see him get back to the top again.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to see maybe some of the harsh opinions of Marc slowly kind of fade away as people realise, wow, actually the transition he's been on in the last few years after coming back from the injury. And I think the worst thing was not even just the injury, just the doldrums with Honda. Like, they probably just destroyed, well, it did destroy him mentally, didn't it? And so seeing him come back so strong now, and the most important thing is just being so happy, regardless of the fact that he's not even in the factory team. He's in the 448 Ducati team, but he's just so happy with life at the minute. It's definitely kicked on kind of this movement to people saying, oh, I don't like Marc Marquez, but now they're actually like, you know what, I respect him for what he's doing and also making MotoGP a more entertaining place, just on and off track at the moment.
You can hear the Jaws music already, Keith. As soon as qualifying is sorted, Marc Marquez could be, winning week in, week out. What do you think is going on for him in qualifying at the moment?
That I don't know, because I'm not close enough. But obviously, it's a situation where trying to get tyre-wise, it is a low grip track. The weather ramped up. It got warmer and warmer until we got to race day. We know that Marc Marquez as a racer is something a bit spectacular. I think we had 3 spectacular rides this weekend. Bagnaia, for me, absolutely class. That he comes back from a mistake that I can't kind of get to the bottom of, that he made. Turn 5, he's notorious at Catalonia. It must be the most expensive sand trap there is in the world, with the amount of motorbikes that have been busted to pieces in it. Jorge Martin hasn't he come of age, to take that position, to stay on that motorbike, to effectively increase his lead in the championship. I think it's by a point, but he still increased his lead in the championship. So Bagnaia's ride on Sunday was spectacular, having dumped it on the sprint race. And you've got Marc Marquez coming through from where he came through to 2 podium positions, again, in circumstances that you couldn't predict it. Anybody that did would be taking a speculative stab at it. But most so-called smart commentators, and there were quite a few around the world on television, radio, and in social media, that didn't think he was going to have a weekend where he was going to be on the podium. And as usual, Marc Marquez came up with the goods. So we had some spectacular rides in a spectacularly difficult set of circumstances. That track was unpredictable. The only way you catch out the quality of rider that went into the sand trap this weekend is when the track is unpredictable, when it is not giving you consistently what you want. These guys are at the top of their game. They don't chuck it away. Acosta falling down. There were accidents that you just wouldn't. Mind you, Acosta, I would have expected that, actually, because he looks like he's on a completely different track to everyone else. His lines are different from everyone else. The way he rides a motorbike is different from everyone else. He is actually a unique MotoGP racer at the moment in his rookie year. He's only probably a meeting away from taking that win. I'd got him for a win at the weekend, I think, hadn't I? Or am I bigging up my predictions again, Amy?
I know one person you had down for a win because you were literally wearing it on your T-shirt, and
it killed him.
It did. What happened to Maverick Vinales this weekend? He obviously had a tough time in qualifying as well, which doesn't help. We all know that qualifying is ever so important these days in MotoGP. And then there was that moment he had when he was trying to chase down Fabio Quartararo. But do you think that was just down to track conditions?
It's confidence, and he is a confidence rider. When he is happy with what he's got underneath him, he's a race winner. Maverick Vinales can, but when he's not confident, and inconsistency is something that blows away the likes of Maverick Vinales. Some riders just can't cope with that. Whereas the likes of Marc Marquez, put a bag over his head and he's still going to ride as fast as he can. He's incredible. I mean, some riders are able to do that. Mind you, hey, what was that bold prediction I made ages ago about Raul Fernandez being on the podium?
I was just about to bring that up, Keith. In the sprint race, it looks for a moment there that it was potentially going to belong to the young guns of Raul Fernandez and also Pedro Acosta. Obviously, like they've got time essentially to make these mistakes, Jack. But what do you think in terms of for someone like Pedro Acosta, who is clearly just this one-off talent, and you do get some allowances, I think, for your first year of, these little rookie errors, as we like to refer them. But when will it be kind of like crunch time for him? When will it be like, okay, you can't keep making these mistakes. You get so close and then your mistake is what's kind of throwing it away?
It's a tricky one because obviously he's got the talent where everyone knows eventually he's going to be a world champion. So he's almost got to kind of get out of jail free card in terms of the mistake sets, because they'll be like, oh, okay, if he makes a mistake, it's fine because in X amount of years, whatever, he's going to win one of these titles for sure. It's quite interesting actually because I did a little MotoGP VIP Village Q&A with his team boss, Nico Goyon, on Sunday morning just after the Moto3 race. And I asked him, obviously there's this overlying stat that he could become the youngest MotoGP race winner ever, take it away from Marc Marquez. And a lot of people are tipping him to do that today. And he went, well, let's see. It was interesting in France because Nico said that it was the first time Pedro felt like he could go for the win. He said it was the first time he was convinced the victory was there for him. And he just got a little bit too excited and made that mistake where he slotted the perfect bike through the gap. So, again, he's probably felt like he could go for the win and was definitely right there to be able to do it and made a mistake. So maybe after this race, he'll get a little bit of a talking to from Nico Goyon and Hervé Poncharal. But, I think anyway, it's kind of one of those where it's like you pat him on the back and say next time.
I think it's probably worth underlying to anybody that's clocked onto the OMG MotoGP website and wonder what the hell we're on about. He's on a gas, a KTM. At the end of the day, it's not even, it's not a Ducati. It's in a gas. It's a KTM, and it's on an independent. It's run by an independent team. Hervé Poncharal, Guy Coulon. We're not talking about the full-on factory KTM. Although I'm sure that with the talent he's got, I'm sure they're running around in the back of the garage and giving Hervé as much help as they can for Tech 3 to run him. But it's still not. I mean, it's almost an equivalent to Marc Marquez at Gresini on a year-old bike, in my view.
Yeah, no, I'd say that. And also look at like where the rest of the KTMs finished this weekend. I mean, the likes of your Brad Binders, Jack Miller, they had another, what we could say, kind of quiet outing. So the fact that you've got Pedro Acosta and Raul Fernandez both Raul Fernandez, actually, I thought he did really well on Sunday's race because it almost looked like he went back and regrouped a little bit and said, right, okay, I need to tidy this up a little bit. And I think Raul Fernandez can walk away from this weekend and be pretty proud of the work he's done.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he's on the front row for the first time, started on the front row. He led the sprint race for some time. It was a bit sad for Trackhouse. They're an American team. We got the Indy 500 that was on this weekend as well. So I would imagine that Justin Marks and co will have been doing some business over there in Indianapolis. So, so far it's their best weekend, But Trackhouse, which is an Aprilia, for those, as I say, have tuned in and are not completely familiar with what we're doing or what we're talking about. It would have been Aprilia's best result if it hadn't been for the fact that he fell off and left it to Aleix to take the win in the end. But I mean, a great result for Trackhouse. I mean, and we need that American connection as well. I believe. I think from a sports point of view, we definitely need the States on side. So big up Trackhouse when we can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely was a big opportunity for us this weekend to really finally have an excuse to just push them and and do lots of content about them. And poor Raul apparently was absolutely distraught after crashing out on Saturday, was crying in the garage supposedly. So I think he got a few hugs and a few come on chin up comments, but and definitely, as you say, like Sunday did an incredible job to regroup and put in that performance, and particularly because I think he didn't feel quite 100% happy with the bike either. So it makes you wonder what he could have done if he did have 100% the feeling he wanted, because he was right there behind the top four early in the race. So if he managed to latch on to the likes of Pecco and Acosta in front of him, it would have been interesting to see just how far up he could have got.
Jack, when the Liberty takeover announcement was made, and also this year with Trackhouse joining MotoGP, have you seen an uptake in audience from the States, just out of interest? Because it was really funny when they did the Liberty announcement. I remember seeing, I can't remember if it was NBC or something like that, but the news anchor, she looked as though she really hadn't got a clue what she was talking about in terms of MotoGP. But, you know, we know, like, as soon as you've got a visual in a sport, it does seem to bring the audience across as well.
There's definitely been an uptake already in American fan base, yeah. I haven't seen the exact numbers, so I'm not sure exactly, but we've seen just a general increase in kind of interest from American audiences. And I think a large majority of it as well, because obviously Formula One had great success in America with Drive to Survive, and a large majority of the fan base that then got into Formula One because of Drive to Survive also used Twitter. And I think we've seen a bit of a crossover between kind of the F1 Twitter and the MotoGP Twitter. And, you know, particularly when big accounts like Motorsport, you know, started putting a lot more MotoGP things on their main account, you know, and you saw those kind of crossover between, maybe F1 fans are going to look at this now that Liberty are involved. It's something for them to be like, there must be something worthwhile here because Liberty are there. So there's definitely been an uptake, and I think the America's GP this year was pretty successful in terms of a larger number of fans than what there was before, and just a general bigger interest from people as well. So hopefully that continues, and we see some more growth, not just in America, but in the other areas where we're struggling as well.
Keith, Jorge Martin, we've touched on him a little bit already in terms of, you know, he actually did what he needed to do due to the set of circumstances. He's come away with adding another point to his advantage in the championship standings. Supposedly a big weekend for him coming up this weekend in terms of the announcement of who will join Pecco Bagnaia in that factory team. What did you think of his weekend in regards to the fact that he's the one essentially with the advantage at the moment, isn't he?
Given the pressure, I think he had a great weekend. I think that given all of what's going on behind the trucks at the moment and management and so on and so forth, I think he had a great weekend. I think that these kind of weekends are the ones where you throw it up the road with frustration. You know, on a track like that, to come out the way he did with an increased lead, okay, only a point. But at the end of the day, I think that he responded in a very Bagnaia kind of a way. You know, Pecco's the world champion. He's looking to try and do that again. There is no other option for him but to win the world title, because that's what Ducati pay him for. You know, if you're on the Pramac side of the world, then, and this is where the politics get really difficult for Ducati. You know, really, the red bike is supposed to be the number one factory machine, and if the likes of Marc Marquez say stays at Gresini and Ducati give him the full-on 25 bike, or goes to Pramac and they give him the full-on 25 bike. I mean, it's going to be a real... Do you bet on Jorge Martin or Marc Marquez coming out of a straight fight? Which one would you put your money on? Mine still would go on Marquez. He's the more ruthless, or maybe he's not the more ruthless of the two, but certainly he's the one that smiles the most and is the more ruthless behind the scenes. That is for sure. In my view, he's a bit of a smiling assassin. And the other side of things is you want the biggest names in the biggest team. You know, Marc Marquez is a much bigger name than Jorge Martin around the world, and has been for a long time, and probably will be for the rest of for the future. It's a difficult thing to overcome. And again, Jack, you'll be across this one. Valentino Rossi, even in years that he dipped, he was still the main superstar. He was still the one that brought in all the fans. When Yamaha signed him, I remember what a coup that is, because they've just signed the biggest name in motorcycle sport. So if he does nothing, it's going to make no difference. It's still Yamaha Valentino Rossi is the association. And Ducati, I think a few years ago, when the big speculation was about where Marc might go, when Marc was killing everything, if he'd gone to KTM back in the day, there was that speculation about KTM paying the big bucks and getting Marc across to him. If he'd gone to KTM and they hadn't won, it would have been KTM's fault. If they had won, it would have been Marc that won the championship on their bike. So it was a no-win situation. But now I see it completely differently. I think that Marc would be a massive asset in the factory team. Now, would it destabilise Pecco Bagnaia? I don't think so. I think Pecco Bagnaia has got a much more stable mind than many teammates would have. So I don't think he really looks across the other side of the garage and is in any fear of anyone. So I think it would work. Jorge Martin in the other side of the garage, he's a bit more of a loose cannon. And you can go back to the Andrea Dovizioso and Iannone days, if you like, where you look across at Andrea Iannone and you just don't know what you're going to have that day, do you? I could say it depends on what he'd been imbibing, perhaps, but probably shouldn't.
Jack, what do you think? I honestly, because I don't know if you guys are like me, but I'm reading into absolutely everything that I see. Like looking at Claudio Domenicali's body language with Marc in part of Fairway this week, and I was like, it's Marc. It's definitely Marc.
It's so hard to know exactly what they're going to do. The common sense option would say you put Martin into the factory and then you just give Marc a GP25 and whatever team he wants, because then it kind of gets rid of the whole Red Bull and Monster headache as well. And also you give the most deserving rider, in my opinion, the factory seat. So it's kind of, there's a sensible option there. But as we know, marketing power of Marc Marquez is greater than any other rider in the sport. I mean, he probably is the single greatest talent we've ever seen on a motorcycle, and Ducati would be foolish. Oh, no? Who's better, Keith?
Stoner.
Yeah, true. All right, fair enough. Okay, let's say there's debate there, because there is. But, I mean, Ducati will be foolish if they never, ever have Marc in full factory red. But it's, it's the headache of all the legal things and the sponsorship things and where the money goes and where it lies. I mean, I'd love it if Marc was in the factory seat. I think it would be absolutely fantastic, just for the whole scenario of Pecco Bagnaia and Marc Marquez kind of stepping into his house, and particularly if Pecco was a three-time world champion, because neither will give a rat's ass, and it will be a really entertaining garage for the next season. But we'll see.
You see, I'm kind of rooting for Marc not to be in the factory team, not because I want to see particularly Jorge Martin in there. I'm neutral on that. I just want to see. I love the fact that Gresini, if he could have a 25 bike, Gresini's a great little team and it deserves what it deserves. And just the personality around that. Pramac as well. I mean, you got to say bloody Guidotti's mob. Campionotti's mob. Freudian slip there. Campionotti's mob. They run a really, really good team. They run a really happy team, one that's bouncing. And if we are looking, again, it comes back to that young demographic. You want a team that looks like it parties. You want a team that looks like it's in. You want a bit. For me, it wants to be a bit surf dude-ish. It wants to be a bit beach. That's how I see it. A bit more motocross even.
It's kind of surf dude-ish.
Well,
Marquez, are you sure?
Like they're having, like it's a party. Like if you're going to get youngsters involved in it, I mean, certainly with my girls, you poke a camera in the factory Ducati's camp, and you've got the Domenicali stack at the back with a face like a slap backside. You've got, it looks a bit too serious. But then you go across to Pramac, and it's Campionotti chatting up Susie Perry and bloody, and so on and so forth. It's just got a bit more sort of feel about it for me. And now we've got the dancing Marc Marquez. Give him a team that he's going to grow as a personality in as well. And I think that would be, for me, certainly a more fun option.
What did you guys think about the Prima Pramac box makeover this weekend? Forgive me, I can't remember who the artist is. Jack, who was the artist? Do you remember off the top of your head?
Oh, you put me on the spot, and I can't
Sorry
remember
about
either.
that.
But
No.
yeah, it was brilliant, wasn't it? Really nice.
It looked cool, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Lovely
and that's what
little
I'm talking
thing.
about. It's. I think the PR department. And again, I'm too far away from it now, but I can't remember who the PR people are at Pramac. But they always chuck out great photographs. They always put out great reels. There's always stuff coming from Pramac. And I think that suits the sport moving forward. I think that's where we need to be. And I mean, I'm sure Jack's going to agree with that straight away because that is your job. But, it costs money to do that kind of stuff. I mean, they had the artist in the back of the garage. I think actually, again, TNT, I'm sorry to keep bigging up TNT since I don't even work for them anymore. But, Susie Perry walked in there and basically pointed a camera at the guy and thumbs up. And he was the guy that was involved in that. And I think that sort of off-centre personality is fantastic, and I think it shows our sport differently from the overly professional, regulated Formula One side of things. I think we do need to be a bit loose, which is, again, comes back to that surf duty type thing that I was on about earlier. Just having a slightly loose feel to it has more appeal to me. I mean, again, OMG MotoGP, anybody, down below is the comment sector. You can tell this old bloke to shut up, or you can get involved in some way that you want to. Please let us know.
Well, we will be back on Thursday because we've got our first back-to-back of the season, so perhaps we'll keep the Mugello chat for then. But it would be worth us having a chat about the Moto2 and Moto3 action we saw this weekend. David Alonso, what was that? 3 wins from the last 4 races now. He is really starting to assert himself in that championship. What do you think of David Alonso, Jack?
A little superstar, isn't he? He's absolutely fantastic. I mean, just there's kind of this, well, he is. He's just a kid having fun, isn't he? And there's a refreshing quality to that, and he's not afraid to show it. And also by the fact that, he speaks good English, he also speaks German, which is a big surprise. I don't know if everyone knows that. And of course, then, even though he's been based in Spain for most of his life, representing Colombia and all this sort of stuff, has seen a really nice kind of uptake of MotoGP fans in Colombia, and we've seen more support from there. So it's brilliant. And also, he's a hell of a rider, isn't he? Like, when he eventually gets into Moto2, if that's next year, let's see what happens. I mean, he's going to be a real weapon.
Yeah, we'd never heard the Colombian national anthem before this year. Now we all can sing it. Pretty cool. That's for sure. Well, I mean, Colin Veijer, the Dutch kid as well. I mean, I'm always amazed at Moto3 because, we were taking, just before we came on here, we were taking the mickey out of Jack because he's a youngster. The point being is they are so young. I bet you feel old when you're amongst the Moto3 spec kids. They're so on it. And so incredibly international and so incredibly educated. I mean, it makes me feel particularly well out of date regarding, because I couldn't touch my arse with both hands when I was the age of these kids. It was, and again, you see them, the way they're performing, all the way through Moto3, and they're just the top tier of Moto3 types. I mean, if you go back through the Spanish Championships and the like, and the Junior World Championships, there's a whole raft of these quick kids that are coming up and through. You ain't got to look over your shoulder when you're a MotoGP rider anymore, because you've just got a whole classroom full of people that are coming through. Thank God they held them back till they're 18 nowadays. Otherwise, we'd be having, the place would be like a school.
The level of competition in Moto3 and Moto2, even in the time that I have been in the sport, has gone up so much. Like, you really, I mean, looking at that Moto3 championship, the names that you've got in it, and like these kids, like you said, Keith, they're really young, and yet they're quite like household names already. MotoGP in another 5-7 years time, the level is going to be unbelievable.
Well, we're always going to be breaking records for the youngest that's done this and the youngest that's done that. On the flip side to that, of course, it is quite worrying for teams like what was Vision Track, which is Michael Laverty's team, for instance, because they're quite insistent to the funding that they get through Dorna and IRTA that we try to promote British riders who, as a standard, are not to this standard, to be frank. Scott Ogden and Josh Watley struggling for whatever reason. It may be that the team don't quite have the money to do what they need to do, or whatever it is that they're not doing. It's not developing, and that makes me worry. They lost Vision Track, who were their headline sponsors. They're relying on the next line of sponsorship, if you like. And once you start playing that game, he's got something like, I think Michael Laverty has got something like 3 championships going on at the moment with kids all over the place. And that needs quite a bit of funding. And again, I think that's, you look further down the order and there are a lot of teams that will be just about making it work financially. And that's not good for the Grand Prix team. So we'll see where that works out. Dorna are very keen for British riders, British teams to work in this environment, but it's almost impossible.
Credit to people like MLAV that are trying, because that's what the thing is. You need people to try, because if everyone gives up, then it's never going to happen. So...
No, Michael is an absolute star. We know he is. He's too far stretched. His funding isn't great enough, even though he works as hard as he does at it. But you can't do it on your own. MLAV needs backing, and the UK is probably the most difficult market to make that work, even though as a global sport, Dorna particularly recognises that we need the British Grand Prix to work. We need British teams to be moving on through, so the British Grand Prix works for our audience. I'm worried about that, and it's going to develop as this year rolls on. I'm sure it is. So we'll talk about it more towards the end of the year, I'm sure.
And just a word on the Moto2 race. Ayagura, nice to see him back on top. I didn't realise that was his first win. Was it 2020? I need to check my notes to see when it actually was. 2022. Do you know what made me laugh though? Because I was just looking back at some of Ayagura's results, and I remember even back in Moto3 when he was like contending for the championship, and qualifying always used to be his Achilles heel. And I was looking at his qualifying results, and I was like, it still seems to be a little thing that he obviously just can't thread together on a consistent basis. And can you be like that as a rider, like a real master of races, but just never quite get the grasp of qualifying? Like, could he very well go through his entire career like that? Or does it just click into place one day?
Well, I mean, the difficulty is with qualifying badly is you put yourself in a position where you can get caught up in other people's accidents and be held up early on. And with tyres, tyres this year obviously have changed to Pirelli, which from the Dunlops. That's taken a whole lot of getting used to as well. And in qualifying, some riders aren't yet able to sort of maximise the potential in qualifying, and that makes a massive difference. Maybe he'll turn it around, but some riders can't qualify. If we're talking about Japanese riders, Taka Nakagami is another one. He's never been able to qualify particularly well, but he's been quite a good racer. I mean, again, talking in MotoGP, Taka Nakagami was the best of the 3 Hondas. For 15th place, for the 1 point, I think Taka got it. Mir was behind him, and Zarco behind him. And poor old, Marini hasn't even scored a point yet this year. He's still on nil point.
Yeah,
which really, the gamble for him to go to Honda was a massive gamble. I wonder what his brother was saying. Don't do it, maybe.
Even more worrying than that, he said that this race was his best race on the Honda, which, okay, it's good that he felt better, but the distance and the position wasn't a major improvement anyway. So hopefully there's some sort of big turnaround there with Honda.
Well, while we're on the subject of turnarounds, and seeing that we're on Moto2, Amy, and that's where you wanted to go, Jake Dixon. Oh, I'll tell you what, I kind of slumped in my chair when he finally made that 3rd place work for him. He got a podium. I just, it was like, thank God, at last, because he hasn't scored a point this year until the weekend. But they've gone in a funny direction. You got the WP suspension that they've gone. There are a few things that they're having to put together again with Pirelli tyres this year. These are all things that once you start moving the jigsaw pieces around in setup, it takes a bit of getting used to, a bit of getting sorted. I hope that was a turning point for Jake Dixon. It was a lonely old 3rd place in the end, but he'll settle for that, I'm sure.
Was that the first time as well this season he's gone full race distance? So that'd be the first time he would have felt the tyres at the end, and to then end on the podium, it's not bad.
It was. Well, actually, I don't know. I haven't got that note written down here, but it's certainly the first time he scored any points.
Yeah. Wasn't bad an effort at all. Actually, that's
good on you, Jake.
Well done, Jake. Like to see you up there. Also, it's just nice. Jake's got one of those smiles, isn't he? He's just got such an infectious smile. So when he, really has.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was a smile or a grimace of late, but luckily the smile is back, and he works bloody hard. Well, everybody does. I mean, I say works hard. Everybody works hard. Otherwise, they wouldn't be where they are. In this game nowadays, it is bloody hard work. And then we go to Mugello. Yeah, my favourite track of the year.
Jack, are you on site for every race this year?
Not every race, just all the ones with MotoE. So I'll be there in Mugello, yeah.
Lovely stuff. Keith and I will be back on Thursday to preview Mugello and also just do our little traveller's tips as we do. Keith, you've got a few special ones there. You can't really have a bad meal out around Mugello, can you?
No, you can't. I mean, I think the key to Mugello is don't be in a hurry.
Yeah.
To get in or to get out. I'll leave that little gem with you for now, but just remember there's a little bar just outside the front area in a field, I think it is. Someone's just sort of rocked up and put one of these little caravan bars out there. Perfect. When you're sat in that traffic jam, you just go, oh, bollocks, I'm going to park here and have me beer.
That was
so
always...
I will have some bar recommendations come Thursday.
Jack, so nice to have you on with us, and I'm sure we'll get you on throughout the course of the year, perhaps one time to talk about MotoE. Are we allowed to talk MotoE on here, Keith?
Yeah.
All right, then. We'll do that later in the year then. Obviously, do send us your questions, comments, voice notes to omgmotogp@gmail.com, on social media, OMG MotoGP. And if you want to become a Patreon member, it's free to do so, but you can actually join our more exclusive Patreon memberships where you can get early access to podcasts and all sorts of little kind of extra bits and pieces. Then please do that. Many thanks to our current Patreon supporters. And also you can become one of our YouTube members. But from all of us here for this weekend, it's goodbye for now. We'll see you again on Thursday.
Thanks for listening to this podcast, and remember, there's no better way to experience the ultimate race weekend than with MotoGP Premier. Grab 10% off select races and packages with the code OMG10 at motogppremier.motogp.com/OMG.